Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Chiang. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Linda Street. She is the founder and CEO of the Simply Street MD Negotiation Coaching, where she helps female physicians negotiate for the salary that they deserve. Women physicians earn up to 30% less than male physicians in similar positions. And studies show that the gender pay gap is independent of women working part-time, taking maternity leave, or any other factors. So by earning less, it makes it even harder for women to build their wealth, which is why I'm so excited to have Dr. Street here to talk about how women physicians can negotiate for better compensation. So Dr. Street, tell us more about what you do.
Hey, thank you so much for having me first off. And yes, absolutely. So I think you bring up such great points just in the introduction of this is low hanging fruit, y'all. Like this is something you're already doing. It is not anything extra. So you need to be paid for what you're doing. And we all know that female physicians actually have better data as far as quality of care and safety data. So why are you being paid less? And so what I do is help empower women to advocate for themselves because for many reasons we are paid less, many of which are outside of our control, but also many are within it. So my goal is to help to empower women to really own what they're providing and own the value they offer and present that in a way that they feel comfortable-ish. Like you're probably not going to feel incredibly comfortable asking for $100,000 more a year, but my goal is that you feel comfortable enough to have the conversation instead of kind of at that point where it seems so unobtainable that you don't even make the ask.
So what are the type of things that women do have control of when it comes to negotiating?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always break it up into mindset, market, and make it happen. So, from a mindset perspective, just acknowledging that we've been socialized as women. And having been socialized as women in a patriarchal culture, there are going to be a lot of limiting beliefs that you've carried for a long time that you don't even necessarily recognize that may be holding you back. And some of these seem relatively benign. Like we've all been told, oh, be nice, or oh, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Like that seems very benign and well-meaning. But if you feel like it's not being nice to ask for what you should be being compensated, even such a benign thought can really hold you back from advocating for yourself. So recognizing that those things are out there is kind of step number one. And then market piece is really just equipping us with market data. So physicians as a whole don't really talk about our salaries with other physicians. And this is getting better. Like I'm seeing some progress here, some transparency that's increasing. But again, we've been socialized culturally that it's rude to talk about money. And I'm sure you deal with this a lot on your end with building wealth. Like it seems unbecoming to talk about wealth building and to talk about what you're earning and what you're making. And so there's not a lot of data out there on what other physicians are making if you don't really try for it. There is a lot of data. You just have to go get it. And so I usually use MGMA, but also just on a local level, talking about your salary, being willing to mentor female physicians and say, look, this is where I'm coming in. And I just want to let you know that so that you aren't being underpaid. Like those conversations happening rises the tide for all of us. And so those are important things. And then the make it happen is really just using very basic negotiation techniques. We're not trying to be Chris Voss here. He's freaking phenomenal. We cannot achieve that today, but using basic kind of leverage and how you're presenting what you're asking for to make it more easily attained.
Yeah, I think there's so much socialization that women have against money. There's a lot of socialization that, men are good with numbers, men are better with money. There are a lot of couples where the woman physician, she might even be making more than her husband, but the husband's still taking care of the finances of the household and she has no idea what's going on.
Right. It's opposite in my house. Like, I don't think my husband has any idea like what is happening on the back end of the bank. He just knows that the credit card doesn't get declined. So life is good.
Yeah, it's opposite my end too. My husband, I keep saying like, okay, if something happens to me, here's all the information.
So you're more organized than me. I keep thinking like I need to get that in some type of organized like template, and it has to be printed because the tech app is real. He's a little older than I am. And yeah, so that if I die, it is not like absolutely catastrophic. I'm like, okay, I need to make sure he at least knows where we have accounts so he can call the people and figure this out. But yeah, no, it's certainly something that we have to overcome, because if you've been told that for such a long time, you believe it. Like it's kind of, and it's a subconscious belief. It's not even something that you're like, oh yeah, I'm bad at money. Like you may not recognize that thought, or for me, it's, oh, I'm bad at negotiation. Same thing, parallel. But it's there. And if you have that belief that you're bad at it, you have to work on that before you can actually do it effectively.
How much do you think the gender pay gap really is about the negotiation factor? I mean, I can imagine there are a lot of male physicians who are also not great at negotiating their salaries or compensation.
Sure. So, I mean, I think some of it's that. And the part of it that's not that, you can sometimes overcompensate for with an effective negotiation. So, a male physician may be offered more from the get go because of cultural biases that they're providing more, and the biases of the people who are offering the contract, right? So, that has nothing to do with how well the female physician is negotiating or not negotiating. They may be offered something different just from the get-go based on perceptions of capability or perceptions of what one should be paid or whatever, like the kind of generalized cultural things that are higher than us and bigger than us. But you can sometimes, even if you're offered less at the get-go, which is total crap, but barring my thoughts on that, if you are offered less on the get-go, like you can still use negotiation to bring that up to where it should be. You can still call them out on their BS kind of nicely, because at the end of the day, you do want to have a relationship with these folks. Otherwise, you wouldn't be interviewing for the job, or you wouldn't be in the job already. But you can use the data and the knowledge to say, look, what you've offered is at the 15th percentile. And what I'm offering you is blank. And this is how I'm helping you to achieve the goals you want to achieve. And I'm not willing to do that at the 15th percentile. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get to where I need to be to feel like it is worth my effort to invest in your organization?
So you talked about the MGMA data. I know that when I started looking for my first job, I had heard about this data, but I had no idea how to find it. How can people actually get these numbers?
Yeah, well, and that's the harder part, is because organizations that contribute to it access that data. And so they have free access to this information that you may or may not have more easily available to you. So if you want to get it straight from the MGMA, then you have to sign a contract, pay for it, yada, yada, yada. I think it was like $1,000 plus or minus back when I did it several years ago from that perspective. Sometimes your organization will give it to you if you're currently in a place and trying to renegotiate. So you can always ask for it. Obviously, depending on the transparency level and the values of your organization, they may not want to share that with you, especially if you're not in the top 50%. The other way you can do it is sometimes libraries. So if you're in academics, AAMC is actually, it's like American Association of Medical Colleges or something to that effect. They have really great data for academics because they break it up based on rank. Because in academics, how long you've been practicing matters, versus in more of a corporate or private practice environment, that's less so, because you're billing the same CPT code. So your in and output in a for-profit organization doesn't matter based on how long you've been practicing. For the most part. I mean, obviously there's some nuances, but so in those organizations, you can sometimes get it in the library. For folks who are in a corporate job and wanting to access this without signing a contract and going to the hullabaloo, either attorneys sometimes have it. I provide it for folks. So I'll pull like a specialty specific, region specific report for folks for a fraction of the price. So mine are at $2.99 unless they're on special for some reason. And so it's available to everyone. It just has to be sought.
And you mentioned the difference between if you're working for academics or you're planning to work for academics versus corporate versus private practice. How does negotiation differ between those different types of jobs?
Well, I think first off, it depends on your values and what you want out of those jobs, because we all know somebody in academics who is pretty much just clinical all the time, versus there are people who are more heavily research based or more in leadership or whatever. And in more of a private or corporate job, if you have medical directorships, that plays into the mix, all of that. So some of it just depends on what your job looks like. But the big thing is in academics, you're going to have some kind of rank discussions as well. So that's actually negotiable also. If you're negotiating for a new job, you don't have to come in as assistant professor. Sometimes you can negotiate based on your prior experience and whatever, a associate professorship from the get-go, or even a full for professorship, depending on kind of where you are in your career and what you've accomplished. So that's actually one more piece that you may add to your negotiation in an academic environment. Your FTE distribution is often going to be something you pay more attention to in an academic job than in a corporate job. In a corporate job, usually most of your time spent that you're being paid for is clinical time, versus in an academic job, you may say, hey, part of why I'm willing to take what is typically a pay cut to be in academics is because I want to teach. So making sure that you're advocating for the time to do the things that are important to you, and part of why you're taking that job is also going to be important in that setup, versus in a more corporate or private practice job, you may advocate for your schedule. So I only work 4 days a week because I have some firm beliefs that that's all people should work. And for me personally, I can be kind of balls to the wall for 4 days. After that, I am like steam out and I need a couple days to recharge. So for me, a 4-day work week was non-negotiable. That was absolutely essential. And I actually work by myself at the moment. So I'm in corporate practice, but solo. And so it wasn't advantageous for them that I only worked 4 days a week, because that means now that their clinic is only open 4 days a week. I'm mostly outpatient. And so I had to leverage that. I had to negotiate for why it was still worth their investment for me to come in at 4 days a week, even though that meant the clinic would be closed. And so I think that the nuances of the job are a little different in academics versus a more corporate or private practice job. But the actual tools and techniques you use, the actual conversations aren't that much different.
Yeah, so a lot of times people think about negotiation, they straight start thinking about the salary, but you brought up something like having a 4-day work week was very important to you. So what are other parts of the job that people need to or should think about in terms of all the different ways of being compensated and how the job is structured?
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, this is going to be one of those things where it's like Baskin Robbins, there are 31 flavors. So it depends a lot on your values. What do you want out of a job? And just that piece, I feel like is huge for many people. A lot of us don't think, what do I want out of a job? We just think, oh, I need to get a job. This is what they're offering. Right. And that's problem number one, because the recipe for long-term sustainability is what is best for me, because I can fit my feet in a half a size too small shoe with a high heel and walk around for a little while. But ultimately, I'm not going to wear that thing very long because it's going to hurt. It's going to pinch. It's not going to feel right. And so at some point, I'm going to trade it in for a pair of sneakers or slippers or something that doesn't hurt my feet. And I think that analogy works well with jobs too. We can push ourselves. We're really good at sucking it up. So we can push ourselves to be in a job that doesn't align with our values, doesn't align with our goals, doesn't work for us for a little while. Like, we are all capable. I stayed in a job that was terrible for me for 3 years. Like, we're all capable of sucking it up for a certain time frame. But there's a point where now you're completely burned out. You may or may not even want to stay in medicine at all because you're so exhausted, because you've been squishing yourself in the box of a job that doesn't fit for you. So I think the first step is asking, what's a me-shaped box job look like? For me, that's 4 days. And I like to be productive. I want a busy clinic. I want to be balls to the wall the whole time I'm there, but I want it to be on my terms, which is 4 days a week. And so I don't mind being productive. My productivity numbers for a 4-day-a-week employee are insane, but I'm only doing it 4 days a week. Friday is non-negotiable, the end. And so that was important for me to really advocate for. For other people, that may not be the case. I've had clients, if you're just looking at scheduling, come in late every day because they want to drop their kids off at school. So they don't want to start their clinic till 9 so that they can have that time with their kids in the morning. I have other people who want to come in early. They're like, hey, I'm happy to start at 7 a.m. It's a really lucrative time slot for what I do for XYZ reasons, especially if you're surgical. I mean, we all know the OR start times are at ODark 30. And so for those people, it may be like, I'm happy to come in at 6:30 a.m., but I want to be out by 2:30 or 3 so that I can spend time with my family, or so that I can still be a human in bank or go to a doctor's appointment or a dentist's appointment or whatever that I need for me. It doesn't even have to be about kids. But you need to look at what you want and then ask for that. Money wise, there are several different buckets. So there's your salary, that's a piece of it. But even within that context, is your salary going to be base where it's just a straight guarantee? Like I show up and I work and I make $300,000 a year. That's what I'm paid. Is it going to be production where it's like I get $50 per review or $100 per review, whatever, depending on what you're doing, so that I'm paid based on what I do? So it's kind of like an eat what you take in kind of model. Or is it somewhere in the middle, right? Like those are all different possibilities just for the salary you make. And then there's one-time things like, is there a retention bonus? Is there a sign-on bonus? Am I being paid for some type of leadership responsibility? You should never do work for free. If they want you to take on a task or lead a task force or do a thing or build a service line, what are you being compensated for that? Because if you're not being paid to do it, you're paying them to work. And I don't pay my employer to work. I show up as a job. I get paid to do it, right? So those are all different buckets that you can look at. Time off, vacation time, PTO, whether that's one encompassing bucket or it's divided into vacation, CME, and whatever. Like all of those different pieces and facets are ways that you're compensated for the value you're providing. So they're all negotiable.
And how important is it to get this all written in the contract itself?
Very. If it's not written down, it's not real. So, I mean, I say that kind of lightly, but if it's not in your contract, they're not obligated to provide it for you. If it's in your contract and they don't provide it, I mean, certainly we've all heard horror stories where that happens, but at least you have a breach of contract. So if you want to get out of that job, if you want to leave, you may not have to honor some of the parameters that you've agreed to because they've not honored theirs. So that may be a way to get out of a non-compete, to get out of paying back a sign-on bonus that wasn't completely prorated out yet. So you want it in your contract because otherwise you have no leverage. You have no way of making sure it's enforced.
Yes, you brought up the non-compete. How important is it to look at that? Because, in a way, if you're settled in an area, that can be sort of another type of handcuffs to keep you at a job that you don't really want to be at.
Yeah. And you and I both know about that very well. So I think it's very important for some people. It's less important for others. If you are moving somewhere for a job and don't have a lot of ties to that community, you're not really bothered by the idea of uprooting and moving somewhere else, then you certainly should try to negotiate the non-compete just in case something happens later that changes that. But it's not the hill to die on. You may choose the schedule hill or the salary hill or whatever else is a biggest priority for you. If you are really rooted in an area and you have family there and you know that there are going to be reasons why you have to stay, whether or not this job works, then that's the hill to die on for you. That is essential that non-compete be as least restrictive as possible. And non-competes in and of themselves, I mean, I think they're criminal and absolutely ridiculous, but corporate medicine uses them as handcuffs for us. I have some opinions on all that, but really and truly, you can negotiate them in different ways. If you can't get it completely removed, you can make it a smaller time window. You can make it a smaller distance. You can make it not include telemedicine, whatever. I think that even if, so say you're in a job right now and you want to leave and you have a non-compete that's really restrictive, you can sometimes negotiate it on the way out. If you want to leave and they want something from you, you may be able to make that better for yourself. Like, hey, I know you're in a pickle until Dr. X starts in September. I'm willing to stay an extra 60 days beyond my notice period so that transition is smooth if you'll waive my non-compete. Like that's potentially negotiable. And worst case scenario, as you and I know, like if you have to leave a job because it's no longer serving you, leave the damn job. Leave it. Don't put yourself in an unhealthy situation because of a non-compete. You can do locums, you can travel. Like there are so many other options that you can do for short time frames. And you and I both have done locums and it was a lovely experience. I mean, I had a 4 and a 7-year-old the year I did a whole year of locums and it was fine. We did okay. And a pandemic happened midway through the year. It was suboptimal, but it was still fine. So I think that the more you can negotiate that on the front end, the better. But if you haven't, it's not the end of the world. You can fix it still.
And even when you do locums jobs, how much room is there for negotiation with the locums?
It depends. So, I mean, negotiation is always based on leverage. And I like to make leverage really simple because I think it sounds like this big, intimidating term, which doesn't serve any of us. So, leverage is really about what do I have to lose if this doesn't go through? And what do they have to lose if it doesn't go through? So, in a locums job in Hawaii in the winter, you probably don't have a lot of leverage, right? Because everybody wants to sit there and be warm. And so you may not be able to negotiate and haggle as many of the details, like where you're put up to live. I mean, that may be one I would pick if I was going to Hawaii for 3 months. I'd be like, hey, I'd like a condo on the beach. Thanks. And so that may be something I focus on more than what I'm being paid. If you are going to Montana in February, you may have a lot more leverage because they may have a harder time filling that position. And having done locums in Montana in February, it's very cold. And for this Georgia girl, that was a big sacrifice. So I think I left 70-degree weather and went into like -5 one time. And I was like, that's like a 75-degree difference, like getting on and off airplanes. This is insane. But so you may have a little bit more wiggle room to negotiate your rate, to negotiate other details about it. So I think that, like all other jobs, locums are negotiable, but you have to be willing to look at a different opportunity, which I think is a little easier with locums for a lot of people, because if you're traveling anyway, like for me, I was like, great, I've never been to Montana. Sounds like a lovely place to go. Let's check it out. I took my kids with me and we went skiing. But if you're willing to go to different places, you may be willing to say, if you can't pay me $3,000 a day, I'm not coming. And then you're always going to have a stronger position because they either can accommodate that or they can't. If they can, great, you're in. If they can't, that's okay. You don't have to do that. And I think that's a place where we sell ourselves short too, is we think that once we've engaged in a conversation, like we need to make something happen. And you have to be willing to walk away. If you're willing to walk away, you have so much more power.
I do want to also bring up negotiating on tail insurance, because that can be something that keeps people at a job that they don't want to be in as well.
Yeah, I am an obstetrician by trade. And so there is no way on God's green earth I would ever sign a contract without tail included, because I have watched people do this, and tail insurance for me would be in the 6-figure range. And so it's a big golden handcuff. So yeah, for me, that's non-negotiable. I will not sign a contract without tail or occurrence-based insurance, which is basically like the all-in-one shampoo of insurance. So tail is absolutely something you should consider. And if you're in a specialty where tail's not bad, like you may price it out. Like, okay, what does tail cost? Okay, it's $25,000. So maybe it's more worth it for me to have 50,000 more a year than to fight the tail insurance battle. And I'm going to keep 25,000 aside just in case I want to leave. Like you get to decide what combination you want to pursue, but it absolutely should be something you consider and something you ask for.
So I know you talked about the fact that we're very good at sucking it up, but usually when people think about negotiation, the feeling of discomfort probably comes up right away. And somehow we're willing to suck up things for a long time instead of feeling the discomfort of negotiation. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, it's a brain hack. Like our brain tells us that this negotiation is the worst thing in the world. But what it forgets is that being in a job that doesn't fit well for you is the worst thing in the world, right? And maybe not the worst thing, but pretty bad. And so I think that the reason we have such a hard time kind of overcoming that barrier, overcoming that hurdle, is we think that we're choosing between the discomfort of the negotiation versus the comfort of just saying yes to what they've already offered us. That's what we think we're choosing between, but it's not true. What you're choosing between is the discomfort of having the conversation. And I like to think of a negotiation as simply a conversation with the goal of making an agreement, because that feels so much less bad, so much less intimidating than having a negotiation. I've got air quotes up here. You guys can't see me. I think that you're really trading the discomfort of the conversation now versus the discomfort of being undervalued later. And when you look at it that way, all of a sudden, that's not such a good deal. Like the gap of being uncomfortable having a conversation and being uncomfortable in all perpetuity is like, oh, maybe I should have this conversation. Maybe I should negotiate, versus the gap of I'm going to be uncomfortable having this conversation versus I can just say yes and it'll be done, seems much smaller if you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, because even finding a new job takes a long time. And if you're not going to leave your current job until you find a new job, that's even more time that you're spending uncomfortable because you didn't want to negotiate in the beginning.
Right, right. And all these parameters go into that. I actually stayed in my first job for about 2 years too long. Maybe about a year and a half. We had a leadership change in the middle, which everything went downhill from there. So, I mean, I stayed in that job for an extra year and a half because of my non-compete, because I thought, like, oh, I don't have any other options. I'm the breadwinner. What am I going to do? And I let that very limiting belief keep me in a job that was incredibly toxic for me for a long time and has had major downstream consequences because of that job, which that's a whole separate podcast in and of itself. But I stayed because I felt like my choice was stay or uproot my family. And I failed to see, it's that all or nothing thinking. I failed to see that there were like 30 other options available to me that I just wasn't considering. I could downsize and just not work for a year. Like that was an option. It wasn't one we wanted to do because I am of the wealth building thought process of I like nice things and I don't have to be frugal in order to build wealth. So for me, that wasn't a good choice, but that was an option. I could do locums, which is what I ultimately ended up doing. I could build a side business, which I kind of did in parallel to that because I found the weeks I was at home that I'm not really good at just sitting around watching Netflix and chilling. So I needed something to do. So I learned how to build a website, right? Like there are so many different options available to you. Your skill set is not limited to only working in a completely contracted job where you live. You can do locums, you can do non-clinical medicine, you can do something not even to do with medicine. You can do medicine outside of your radius. I mean, there's so many different options. But until you're willing to kind of get out of the headspace of, I have to stay here or I'm screwed, then you're not going to see any of those choices.
When someone decides that they're going to look for a new job, or even someone out of training looking for their first job, do you recommend just applying for lots of different jobs, even in locations you wouldn't necessarily consider going to, just so that you have a lot of offers that you can now bring to the job you want to go to as a negotiation tactic?
Yeah. So I usually actually don't, believe it or not. I have never interviewed at more than like one or two jobs at a time. I think it depends is the long or the short answer, but I think it depends on your values and your goals. If you're not particularly attached to a certain location or a certain type of setup, then I think exploring those different options and interviewing at enough places that you get a really good breadth of offers and opportunities is really valuable for you. But I don't think you have to. All it takes is one other offer to really use as leverage. And to be honest, you don't even have to have that. So if you're sitting there listening to this saying, there's one job, I want to make it happen. How do I negotiate there if I can't use other places as leverage? You're still not kind of up a creek without a paddle. You just have to approach leverage maybe a little more creatively. Like you may have to leverage, like, this is why I uniquely can solve your problems. This is why I uniquely am the best for physician for this position. And so I think that my answer is that you can broadly throw out your net. And certainly that offers more opportunities because you may have a wide variety of different options and offers that you can use either to leverage somewhere else or that you can use to decide between, but you don't have to. So I think that applying widely within the context of jobs you may actually take is sort of my answer. I don't think you should just go interview places that you would never consider in order to have leverage. I think you can build leverage elsewhere as well.
Great. So when you kind of read negotiation books or start learning about negotiation, they always say like have the other person throw out the number first. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always awesome. It's optimal. But I think every once in a while you're in a position where they're like, okay, no, really, what do you want? So if they can give you a context of a framework or a range they're looking in, I think that's optimal. So let's say they say, what are you looking for? I think that we tend to undersell ourselves. So if you're going to answer that question with anything other than my favorite answer, which is, I'm just starting to learn about the position. And I know certainly you have a lot more familiarity with what you're looking for and what that may entail. So what are you thinking this is valued at? Or what are you hoping to offer? What range are you looking to pay within? I think that if you can spin it back on them, that's always optimal. If you absolutely get boxed in a corner because you've tried these couple things and they've not budged on you and still won't give you any information, I think that it needs to feel like a stretch. Start high. start with a number that feels a little bit uncomfortable to throw out there, because I can't tell you how many times they just say, okay, great. And you're like, crap, I just didn't ask for enough, right? If they answer yes too quickly, I probably didn't push the envelope enough. But you can optimize the chances of actually hitting a ballpark, but within the realm of reason, that they're just not like, she's insane, I'm not paying you $8 million a year to come work here. Then I think you're in a better context. And I tell people it should feel a little uncomfortable to ask for. Like when you think of your number, 75th percentile is usually a minimum ballpark I tell people to range for if you're looking at just charts. But from a gut level, if the number doesn't feel a little uncomfortable asking for, then it's too low. Because if you feel very comfortable asking for it as somebody who's been socialized as a female physician in this world, it's probably way too low.
And what are some red flags to look for that you'd recommend for someone to essentially walk away instead of continuing to negotiate?
Yeah. And I feel like this has been my theme today, so I apologize for going back there. It depends. So it depends on what's important to you. But red flags for me are not being willing to put it in the contract. So anything that they're not willing to put in the contract is something they've not actually agreed to 100%. And my kind of litmus test for that is, would I take the job if this isn't in the contract? Because sometimes you will ask for something and they will absolutely refuse to put it in the contract. So should you take the job or not? The answer is, if they didn't honor that promise, would you be glad you took the job? And if the answer is no, I would hate that I took this job. If they wouldn't honor that, then it has to be in the contract, or it's a red flag. You should walk. If it's something that's a little more negligible and you're like, I'd really like to have it, but if they didn't honor their word on this, I'd still take the job, then it's a little bit less of a red flag. It's more like a yellow flag, because at some point there are certain details that they're just not going to put in the contract. But I think not being willing to put major details in the contract is a huge red flag. So that's probably a first one. If they're not responsive and not willing to have a conversation with you, that's always a red flag for me. So I have had a few people where offers have been rescinded, which is, I think, everybody's worst fear. They're like, okay, if they take away the offer, that's what's the scariest thing to me. And to be honest, every single one of those people ended up in a better fit job ultimately. And so it was the best thing ever for them, but didn't feel that way at the time. So I think that if they are completely unwilling to budge on something that's important to you, that's a red flag. If they're not even willing to engage in a conversation about a negotiation, that's a red flag for me. Because even if it's somewhere where, say, everybody is actually paid the same, and I have thoughts about parity, that's a whole separate conversation too. But if they absolutely have, like, this is what we offer everyone, I cannot modify this, they at least should be willing to engage in a conversation about that. They shouldn't just say, this is it, sign it or leave it. They should say, I recognize your concerns. I see what you're saying to me. Maybe there are different ways we can approach this, or you can say that and see how they respond. But we do pay everyone in this position this rate, and that's why this is what we're able to offer. That's a lot different than sign it, take it, or leave it. So it's how they engage in the conversation and their willingness to hear your needs and your requests that I think is most important there.
Have you found situations where there are institutions where, like, maybe someone really values having more vacation time? Like, I personally love to travel internationally, and that's, I want to work a certain amount, but I want to have vacation time. But there have been institutions where, like, all our doctors get 4 weeks of vacation, and this is non-negotiable. Do you find that it's truly non-negotiable, or what's the range that you've found on that?
Yeah. So the wide range, sometimes, yes, it is non-negotiable, but I think that's where exploring clever other things is a possibility. Like, are there opportunities for a sabbatical where I could maybe do some work internationally? Are there opportunities for unpaid time off and I can make up for it by having a higher salary somewhere else? I think that if they're willing to engage in other possibilities that ultimately result in you having the time off you need to be happy doing what you want to do, then I think that's not a concern so much. It's when they're like, this is what we do, no, there are no workarounds, that you really have to say, well, is this the job for me? If a high value for me is time to travel internationally, and that's a high priority for me as a human that I need to be fulfilled, then I'm probably not long-term going to be really happy in a job where that is not an option.
And what about someone who's in a job, which, is not terrible, but they realize they're underpaid, they've talked to colleagues and they're getting paid way less? What is the strategy to negotiate for a higher compensation or some other benefits to kind of get better parity with their peers?
Yeah, I think just having the conversation. So in that situation, I mean, I've had many clients there, is just shoot an email out saying, hey, I'd like to meet with, and you include all the key players. I don't like to blindside people. So I like to let them know why I want to meet with them ahead of time so they can be prepared. But so just shooting out an email saying, hey, I'd like to have a conversation regarding my compensation. When would be a good time that we can meet? Who needs to be present? Something like that is a great first step, just having the conversation. And I'm a big fan of getting information by asking questions. I think that it engages the employer in the process. Like, hey, how can we bridge this gap? How can we make this better? How can we have more parity? When can we have this conversation? Anytime you're asking questions, you're really gaining data that you can use to better have these conversations. And you're also showing that you're not making demands, you're having a conversation. And I think from a human nature place, it is less likely to trigger like a fight or flight response in the person you're talking to and a high cortisol reaction in them, which you don't want when you want them to say yes to you, if you're engaging from a curious place. So having that kind of curiosity mentality, like how else could we approach this? Like, I understand that this is what you're offering. I understand that this is what I'm looking for, and they're different. How can we make this happen to where I can provide what I do for you in a way that also honors what I need for this to be sustainable? And a huge pain point for employers right now is turnover, really in and out of healthcare. So that's, I mean, we're not special in that, but turnover is a huge expense. It leaves gaps in care. It's expensive. It's a pain in the ass. Nobody wants to do it. So I think really focusing on that of, look, I want to make this a long-term fit. I'm invested in your organization, and this is what I can do for you. In order to do that, I need these things so that I can continue to sustain being an employee here. Something like that shows them why you need what you need and how it benefits them.
Great. There's been so many pros that you've shared with us. So if someone wants to work with you, how do they find you?
So you can find me at my website, which is Simply Street, STREET, just like you live on one, MD.com. So simplystreetmd.com. And that's my website. It has all of my offerings and everything to come work with me. If you want just pay data alone without working with me, that's available there as well. If you want to get a feel for my approach or kind of learn more about some of these negotiation or conversation topics, I have a podcast as well where you have been a lovely guest at Simply Worth It. And you can find that anywhere podcasts are found.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about your course.
Yeah, so my course is kind of a multifaceted program. Right now, it's lifetime membership because my goal is to teach the skill set of negotiation, not to teach you a survival guide for a specific negotiation, because this comes up for us as women physicians many different ways and many different kind of facets of our life. So my course is a combination of a one-on-one strategy session with me. So we like get down to the nitty-gritty to help plan your specific negotiation, but then it also has weekly group support and some education topics through a course. Is quick and dirty because we're all busy and I'm a straight to the point kind of gal, but it's got all that information so that you can sustain that skill set, so that as you're moving through your career, you're able to readdress things that were perfect 3 years ago, but aren't working for you in this season. Because ultimately you can negotiate the perfect contract and it may be perfect today, but you don't know that that's going to be exactly what you need 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 7 years from now. And you want to have a job that can modify as you grow and evolve with you so that you can stay in the same place. Or you're going to have to look for a new job that has evolved with you and is kind of where you're at now. And so I like to have that continued support so that as we're evolving as humans, our jobs can move with us.
That's so awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us. To all our listeners, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you.